Mason, I've been looking forward to our chat today. There's something really cool about discussing how economics and everyday life connect. And who does that better than Freakonomics Radio?
Oh, absolutely, Sophia. Freakonomics has this amazing way of taking complex ideas and breaking them down so anyone can understand. It's almost like they're telling stories instead of just spitting out facts, don't you think?
Exactly. That's why it resonates with so many people. And speaking of stories, today is going to be a deep dive into some of those fascinating ideas. They explore stuff like incentives, human behavior, and the unintended consequences of our choices.
Vocabulary preview.
Vocabulary preview.
Oh yeah, exactly. Vocabulary preview.
Before we jump into the details, let's go over a few key phrases and terms you'll hear a lot in this conversation. This will help everyone follow along easily.
Right, so first, we've got the term incentives. It's a fancy word for motivations basically, why people do what they do. Companies use incentives all the time, whether it's giving bonuses to employees or offering discounts to customers.
Another key concept is unintended consequences. It's when actions have effects we didn't expect. You might think you're doing one thing, but it triggers something totally different, sometimes good, sometimes not so good.
And let's not forget opportunity cost. This one's about trade-offs. Every time you make a choice, you're giving up something else. For example, if I spend an hour watching TV, that's an hour I'm not spending working on a new project. You always have to give up one thing to get another.
Great! With those key phrases in mind, let's jump into the first part of our conversation. Mason, what do you think makes Freakonomics Radio so different from other business podcasts? I mean, they're talking about economics, but in a way that makes it feel personal.
You know, I think it's their storytelling approach. They don't just throw numbers and statistics at you, they relate everything to real-life examples. Take the episode where they talk about how teachers' incentives can affect student performance. That sounds dry, but they explain it through a story about a school district that gave bonuses to teachers based on how their students performed. And the result? Well, some teachers just taught to the test classic example of unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like they pull back the curtain on how everyday things work, whether it's in business, education, or even crime. They show you that economics is everywhere. I remember the episode about the hidden side of everything. It really got me thinking, why do people make the choices they do?
That's a huge part of it, right? Understanding behavior. People think economics is all about money, but it's more about human behavior, how we respond to incentives, why we make certain decisions, and the ripple effects those decisions have. You know what I mean?
Totally, and it's funny how often those incentives don't work the way people expect. Like, take the story of New York's rat problem. City officials thought they could get rid of rats by offering money to people for every rat tail they brought in. But guess what happened? People started breeding rats to make money. They had no idea their incentive would backfire like that.
That's a perfect example of unintended consequences. They wanted fewer rats, but they ended up with more because they didn't think about how people might game the system.
It really makes you rethink how businesses and governments set up their systems. Sometimes you think you're doing the right thing, but unless you understand how people might react, you could end up making things worse.
Exactly. And that's why I love Freakonomics. It forces you to look at the world differently. It's not just about crunching numbers, it's about understanding why people behave the way they do.
Yeah, and speaking of behavior, I think one of my favorite episodes was when they explored the idea of opportunity cost, not just in business, but in everyday life. They asked, what are you giving up every time you make a choice? It's a powerful way to think about things, right?
Absolutely. It reminds me of when they talked about how we allocate our time. If I'm spending my evenings answering emails, what am I not doing? Maybe I'm not relaxing, or I'm missing out on spending time with family. It really makes you think about priorities both in business and life.
Sounds like you've been listening to Freakonomics in your free time.
Guilty as charged. But seriously, it's these kinds of insights that make you reflect on your own habits, don't you think? I've started to rethink how I make decisions, whether it's about my time, my money, or even my work. The show just shifts your perspective.
You know, I feel the same, especially when they discuss the hidden factors that influence our choices. It makes me wonder how many times have I made a decision thinking it was the best option without even realizing there were other forces at play.
I guess that's what makes Freakonomics Radio so powerful. It shows us that every decision, every choice has layers we don't always see. And in the world of business, understanding those hidden layers can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Now that we've had a good warm-up with the basics, let's get into the really interesting part: how all these Freakonomics concepts actually play out in the real world. I know you've got a few stories up your sleeve.
Oh, you know me too well, but seriously, this is where things get fascinating. It's one thing to talk about ideas like incentives and opportunity cost in theory, but when you see how businesses try to use these to their advantage or fail spectacularly, it's a whole new ball game.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more. I mean, sometimes it feels like businesses are constantly trying to hack human behavior, but it doesn't always work out the way they expect.
Exactly. It's all about understanding how people really behave, not how we think they should behave. And that's where businesses often get tripped up. One of my favorite examples is when companies use discounts and loyalty programs to try and increase customer retention. Sounds smart, right?
Of course, who doesn't love a good discount? But there's got to be a catch, right?
Oh, there's always a catch. So imagine you're running a business and you decide to offer a loyalty card. Every time a customer buys something, they get a stamp, and after 10 stamps, they get a free coffee or something like that. Simple. You're thinking, great, this will keep people coming back.
Makes sense so far. I definitely come back for a free coffee.
Right, but here's where it gets tricky. What you're really doing is training your customers to expect rewards every time they buy something. The moment you stop offering the loyalty program, or if they find another place that gives them a better deal, they'll jump ship. Instead of building loyalty, you're just giving people a reason to shop around for the best perks.
Oh, so it's like they're loyal to the rewards, not the brand itself.
Exactly. That's one of those unintended consequences we were talking about earlier. You think you're building customer loyalty, but really, you're just creating a what single quotes as dash in dash it dash for dash me single quotes mentality.
That's wild. It makes you wonder how many businesses actually think through the long-term effects of these kinds of strategies. I mean, they're focused on short-term gains, but they might be setting themselves up for failure down the road.
Yeah, and it's not just with loyalty programs. Think about pricing strategies. A lot of companies will lower their prices to attract more customers, but once people get used to those lower prices, it's really hard to raise them back up without losing customers. It's like you've devalued your own product.
I see what you mean. It's like once you start offering something cheaper, people expect that lower price, and they won't want to pay more. So in the long run, you're kind of stuck.
Exactly. It's like a trap, and once you're in, it's hard to get out. The thing is, a lot of businesses don't think about the psychology behind these decisions. They're just looking at the numbers and trying to get more customers through the door.
That's such a good point. It makes me wonder, how many companies actually succeed with these tactics? I mean, there's got to be some that get it right.
Oh, definitely. There are plenty of companies that know how to use incentives the right way. For example, instead of giving out discounts or freebies, they create a sense of community or exclusivity. Think about companies like Apple. People don't buy Apple products because they're cheaper or because they're getting a discount. They buy them because they want to be part of the Apple experience.
Yeah, that's so true. I've got friends who are total Apple fans, and it's not because the products are cheap, it's because they feel like they're part of something bigger. That's a whole different kind of incentive.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how you can use psychology to create loyalty, not with rewards, but with a brand experience. People are willing to pay more because they feel connected to the brand.
You know, it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day when I was shopping online. I realized that I wasn't just buying the product, I was buying into how it made me feel. I wanted that feeling of being part of something cool, something exclusive.
Exactly, and that's what Freakonomics gets at. It's not just about dollars and cents, it's about understanding human motivation. Once businesses figure that out, they can really start to make a difference.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you think about it. And speaking of motivation, have you noticed how even small incentives can have a big impact on behavior? I was reading this study about how people responded to different rewards, and it turns out that even tiny incentives like a free coffee or a small discount can make people change their habits.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. There was an episode on Freakonomics where they talked about how little things can nudge people in a certain direction. It's called nudge theory, and it's all about setting up choices in a way that encourages people to make better decisions without forcing them.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's like instead of making people feel like they have to do something, you give them a gentle push. I think that's why so many companies are starting to use things like behavioral economics to design their marketing strategies.
Right, and it's not just companies. Governments use this approach too. I remember hearing about how some countries are using nudge theory to get people to save more for retirement. Instead of making it mandatory, they just make saving the default option, and people tend to stick with it.
That's so smart. It's like they're giving people the freedom to choose, but they're also guiding them toward the better choice. It makes me wonder how many other areas of life could be influenced by these small nudges.
Yeah, and it's something we don't always think about. We're making decisions every day, some big, some small, but a lot of them are influenced by little things we might not even notice. That's what Freakonomics is all about, pulling back the curtain and showing us how those invisible forces shape our choices.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Every choice we make has layers, and sometimes we don't even realize what's influencing us.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to uncover when it comes to understanding human behavior, especially in business.
Now we've covered so much ground already, but there's still one question that's been on my mind since we started talking. How do all these Freakonomics ideas play out in the long run? I mean, sure, incentives and nudges work in the short term, but what about the bigger picture?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to see the effects of incentives or pricing strategies in the short term, but the long-term consequences are a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, like how businesses or even governments adjust their strategies over time. I was thinking about that example you gave earlier, where companies offer loyalty programs and then end up stuck in a cycle of constantly trying to outdo themselves.
Exactly. It's like they're trapped in a loop. Once they've set a precedent, it's hard to go back without upsetting their customers. And that's where long-term thinking comes in. Businesses need to ask themselves, what kind of relationship do we want with our customers 5 or 10 years from now?
Right, it's not just about quick wins. It's about building something sustainable. That's where I think a lot of companies struggle. They focus so much on immediate profits that they forget to think long-term.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that customers can sense that. We've all been there, right? When you walk into a store or interact with a brand, you can tell if they're genuinely interested in you or just trying to make a quick sale.
Totally. I had an experience recently where I bought something online, and the company followed up with this super personal message. It wasn't just the usual thanks for your purchase. They actually asked how I was enjoying the product and if there was anything they could do to improve my experience. It felt so genuine, and you know what? I'm definitely going to buy from them again.
See, that's the key. When businesses invest in building trust and relationships, it pays off in the long run. It's the same with pricing strategies or even employee incentives. If companies only think short-term, like cutting costs at the expense of quality or offering bonuses without real career growth, they risk losing both customers and employees in the long run.
And it's not just businesses, right? I mean, these concepts apply to our personal lives too. How many times have we made decisions based on short-term benefits, only to regret them later?
Oh, for sure. I've been there myself, like choosing a job because it paid more upfront, but then realizing it wasn't the right fit for my long-term happiness. It's so easy to get caught up in the moment and not think about what's best for the future.
Yeah, same here. I remember choosing an apartment because it was cheaper, but after living there for a few months, I realized it didn't have the things that were important to me, like natural light and a good neighborhood. I ended up moving out sooner than I planned, so in the end, I didn't save any money at all.
Exactly. That's the thing about trade-offs. We think we're making the right decision because it seems like the best option at the time, but when we step back and think long-term, the picture changes. It's like that concept of opportunity cost in Freakonomics. What are we giving up by choosing one thing over another?
Yes, opportunity cost is huge. I didn't really understand it until I started thinking about decisions in terms of what I was giving up. Like, if I spend all my time working, what am I missing out on? Time with family, hobbies, maybe even my health.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to balance short-term gains with long-term benefits. Whether it's in business or personal life, making decisions with a long-term view can lead to more satisfaction and stability.
That's such a good point. It makes me think about how we can apply these concepts in our daily lives. Like, what are some practical ways we can start thinking more like economists when it comes to our choices?
I'm glad you asked. One of the simplest things is to always ask yourself, what am I giving up? That's the opportunity cost question. Whether it's money, time, or energy, everything has a cost. Once you start thinking that way, you begin to see your choices more clearly.
I love that. It's such a simple question, but it really shifts your perspective. I've noticed that when I make decisions with that in mind, I feel more confident about my choices.
Exactly. Another thing is to think about incentives. What's motivating you to make a certain choice? Are you doing something because it's truly what you want, or because you feel pressured by external factors? That's something I've had to remind myself of often.
Yeah, that's a big one for me too. I've definitely made decisions because of pressure, whether it's from work or even just social expectations. But when I step back and think about what really matters to me, the right choice becomes clearer.
It's amazing how much clarity we can get when we ask the right questions. And that's what Freakonomics is really about, right? Asking the right questions. Once we start doing that, whether in business or life, we make better decisions.
That's such a good takeaway. I feel like this conversation has given me a lot to think about, not just in terms of business, but in my own life too. It's all about finding that balance between short-term wins and long-term fulfillment.
Yeah, it's all connected. Whether you're running a business or just trying to figure out your next step in life, the principles are the same. It's about understanding human behavior and using that knowledge to make better decisions.
Now, we've covered so much ground today, haven't we? From understanding the impact of incentives to exploring long-term effects, this has been such a deep dive into how Freakonomics concepts apply in real life.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey. And I think it's time to wrap things up by reflecting on what we've learned and how we can apply these ideas practically.
Great idea. So, let's start with the key takeaways. What do you think are the most important points for our listeners to remember from today's discussion?
First and foremost, it's crucial to understand the concept of incentives. They drive behavior, both in business and in our personal lives. Recognizing what motivates people can help us design better strategies and make more informed decisions.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the role of opportunity cost. Every decision comes with trade-offs, and being aware of what we're giving up is key to making better choices. It's about balancing short-term benefits with long-term outcomes.
And we discussed how important it is to think long-term, whether in business strategies or personal decisions. Quick fixes might seem appealing, but they often lead to bigger issues down the road. Sustainable choices and building trust are crucial for lasting success.
Absolutely. I think the practical applications of these ideas are what make them so valuable. For example, in business, companies should focus on creating genuine relationships with their customers rather than just chasing immediate profits.
Exactly. And for individuals, it's about making decisions that align with our long-term goals and values. Whether it's career choices, financial decisions, or even daily routines, thinking ahead and understanding the real costs can lead to more fulfilling outcomes.
Let's dive a bit deeper into how listeners can practically apply these concepts in their own lives. For instance, how can someone use the idea of incentives to improve their productivity?
That's a great question. One practical approach is to set up a reward system for yourself. If you're working on a big project, break it down into smaller tasks and reward yourself when you complete each one. The key is to make the rewards meaningful and aligned with what motivates you.
That's a fantastic idea. I've found that setting personal milestones and rewarding myself really helps keep me motivated. And it's not just about rewards sometimes, it's about finding the right balance between challenge and achievable goals.
Absolutely. And another tip is to use accountability partners. Share your goals with a friend or colleague who can help keep you on track and offer encouragement. Having someone to check in with can increase your commitment and motivation.
That's such a valuable approach. It's like having a built-in support system. And it ties back to what we talked about: relationships and trust play a big role in achieving our goals.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. Building strong, supportive relationships, whether in business or personal life, can make a huge difference. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels motivated and valued.
So, as we wrap up, what would you say is the most important piece of advice for our listeners based on today's conversation?
I'd say it's about embracing a long-term perspective and understanding the true costs and benefits of your decisions. Whether it's in business, personal life, or even small daily choices, thinking ahead and being aware of incentives and trade-offs can lead to more thoughtful and rewarding outcomes.
I couldn't agree more. It's about making informed choices and understanding what really drives us. I hope our listeners feel inspired to apply these concepts and see the impact in their own lives.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this journey through Freakonomics. It's been a pleasure discussing these ideas with you, Sophia, and with all our listeners.
Thank you, Mason, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. We hope you found this conversation as enlightening and enjoyable as we did. Until next time.